The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried across 10,000 light years by the fastest courier drone the Galactic Conclave possessed. Ambassador Yelthari of the Conclave read it twice before sending it forward, her 4 eyes blinking in what her species called satisfaction, though other races might call it smugness. She had handled disputes like this for 600 years, and she knew exactly how this would end. The Valilith Dominion had done something terrible, something that would have shocked younger civilizations, but barely raised concern among the elder races who had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore. They had destroyed a human colony world called New Meridian, turning 2,300,000 souls into ash and glass and memory. The Valith claimed the world sat upon an ancient migration route their ancestors had used 15,000 years ago, long before humans had even discovered fire. They said the humans were trespassing on sacred ground, and they had simply removed the trespassers. Now the Conclave would do what it always did. It would bring both sides together, let them argue and shout and threaten, and then it would broker a deal that satisfied no one but prevented further bloodshed. This was civilization. This was how the galaxy maintained peace for 40,000 years. Yelthari drafted the formal summons with practiced ease, addressing it to the human government on Earth. She used the traditional language, the same words that had opened 10,000 negotiations before. The Conclave of 12 requests your presence to discuss matters of mutual concern, and to seek resolution through dialogue and understanding. She expected the humans to arrive with lawyers and diplomats, with carefully prepared arguments and desperate pleas for justice. She expected them to demand reparations they would never fully receive, to accept whatever scraps the Valith offered, and to go home bitter but alive. This was the way of things. 3 weeks later, Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of the UNS Themis and read the summons with eyes that held no emotion. Her face was carved from stone, her gray hair pulled back in a tight knot, and her uniform bore the weight of 40 years of service to humanity. She had seen the images from New Meridian. She had watched the sensor recordings that showed Valith warships descending like a plague of metal locusts. She had listened to the final transmissions from the surface, the screaming and the praying and the terrible silence that followed. 2,341,847 people had lived on New Meridian. Farmers and teachers and children and dreamers, people who had traveled across the stars to build something new, something beautiful. Now they were gone, and the Conclave wanted to negotiate. Vance handed the summons to Fleet Judge Advocate General Marcus Cole, a tall man with dark skin and darker eyes who had spent his career ensuring that human military forces followed the laws of war. He read it without expression, though a muscle in his jaw tightened. "They want us to negotiate," Vance said, and her voice was flat and cold. Cole folded the document carefully, precisely, as if it might shatter in his hands. "Then they do not understand what happened on New Meridian, Admiral." "No," Vance agreed. "They do not." She turned to her communications officer, a young woman named Chen, who had lost a sister on New Meridian. "Open a channel to Earth, Priority Alpha. Get me the tribunal." Chun's hands trembled slightly as she worked, but her voice was steady. "Channel open, Admiral." The main screen flickered to life, showing a chamber on Earth that few humans ever saw and fewer still understood. It was called the Hall of Judgment, and it had been built 3 centuries ago when humanity first ventured into the stars. The founders of human space exploration had studied the galaxy's diplomatic systems carefully, and they had seen the truth that the elder races preferred to ignore. They had seen that negotiation without consequence was just another word for surrender, that peace without justice was just another word for defeat. So they had built something different, something the galaxy had forgotten existed. 5 figures sat in the Hall of Judgment, their faces hidden in shadow. They were called the Tribunal, and they held power that most humans never needed to know about, power that had slept for generations, waiting for a moment like this. Admiral Vance, the central figure, spoke, and the voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. We have reviewed the evidence from New Meridian. We have watched the recordings and read the reports. We have seen what the Valith Dominion has done. What are your orders? Vance asked. The Conclave expects negotiation. They will not receive it. The figure leaned forward, and for just a moment, light caught the edge of a human face, lined with age and heavy with purpose. Humanity invokes the right of judgment under Article 7 of the Galactic Founding Compact. The Valith Dominion will face trial for genocide, for crimes against humanity, for the murder of 2 million souls who asked only to live in peace. And if they refuse? Cole asked. Then they will learn what humanity does to those who kill our children and laugh about it afterward. The channel closed, and silence filled the bridge of the Themis. Young Lieutenant Park, fresh from the academy and still learning how the galaxy truly worked, turned to the executive officer with confusion in his eyes. Sir, what is a tribunal? I have never heard of this. Commander Torres, a veteran of 30 years who had seen things that would turn a civilian's hair white, looked at the young officer with something that might have been pity. The tribunal is what humans created when we realized the galaxy would never protect us, Torres said quietly. It is what we built when we understood that some crimes cannot be negotiated away. Some evils cannot be discussed into submission. But what does it do? Torres turned back to his station, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. It is what humans do when negotiation would be an insult to the dead, Lieutenant. It is judgment, pure and simple. Park swallowed hard, looking at the star map that showed their destination. And the Conclave does not know this exists? The Conclave forgot it existed. Article 7 has not been invoked in 12,000 years. Most species think it is ceremonial, a relic from darker times. Admiral Vance's voice cut across the bridge, hard and sharp as broken glass. Navigation set course for Eternal Discourse Station. Communications, signal the fleet, all 47 ships will jump together. 47 ships, Admiral? Park asked, his voice cracking slightly. Vance looked at him, and for just a moment, something human flickered behind her iron mask, something that might have been grief, might have been rage, might have been the terrible weight of what was coming. The Valith killed 2 million of our people and expected us to come begging for scraps at a negotiating table. They will learn that humanity does not beg, Lieutenant. She turned back to the view screen, where stars waited cold and patient. They wanted to see what humans do when pushed too far. Now they will find out. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, and the galaxy held its breath without knowing why. The Eternal Discourse Station hung in the void like a jewel made of light and metal, spinning slowly at the center of neutral space where no empire held claim. It had floated here for 40,000 years, watching civilizations rise and fall, hosting 10 million negotiations that prevented 10 million wars. Ambassador Yelthari supervised the preparation of the Grand Mediation Chamber with the careful attention of someone who had done this work for centuries. She ordered comfortable seats designed for human bodies, translation devices tuned to human languages, and refreshments that human digestive systems could process. The Valith delegation had already arrived, filling one side of the chamber with their scaled bodies and golden eyes. High Commander the Serac sat at their center, his massive frame draped in ceremonial armor that spoke of conquest and glory. He was not worried. Why would he be worried about a species that had only traveled the stars for 3 centuries? A species so young they still counted their history in mere thousands of years. The Valith Dominion had ruled its corner of the galaxy for 20,000 years. They had crushed rebellions and absorbed empires and survived wars that turned entire star systems to dust. The humans would come with their lawyers and their tears, and the Zarak would offer them some worthless territory on the edge of Dominion space. They would accept because they had no choice, and the Conclave would call it peace, and everyone would pretend that justice had been served. This was how the galaxy worked. Then the alarms began to scream. Yelthari rushed to the observation deck, her 4 eyes widening at what she saw emerging from faster-than-light travel. Ship after ship burst into normal space, forming a perfect ring around Eternal Discourse Station. These were not diplomatic vessels. These were warships, human warships with hulls painted black as the void itself, bristling with weapons that the Conclave's databases could not identify. They moved with perfect coordination, each one taking its position like soldiers on a parade ground. 47 warships surrounded the station, and at their center floated something that made Yelthari's blood run cold, a vessel larger than any human ship on record. Its design unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. The UN's Themis had arrived. Yelthari opened a communication channel with trembling hands. Human vessels. This is Ambassador Yelthari of the Galactic Conclave. Your arrival is most unprecedented. We expected a diplomatic delegation, not a military fleet. Admiral Vance's face appeared on screen, carved from ice and iron. Ambassador, we did not bring a diplomatic delegation. Then what have you brought? Prosecutors, Vance said. Judges and executioners. The chamber fell silent. Even the Zarak's mocking smile faded slightly. Humanity formally invokes the right of judgment under Article 7 of the Galactic Founding Compact. Vance continued, her voice carrying across every speaker on the station. The Valith Dominion stands accused of genocide against the human colony of New Meridian. They will face trial for their crimes. Yelthari searched her memory frantically, trying to recall what Article 7 even said. It was ancient law, written when the Compact was first formed 12,000 years ago, back when the galaxy was younger and species still believed in things like justice and accountability. Admiral Vance, she said carefully, Article 7 has not been invoked in living memory. Most scholars consider it ceremonial. We do not consider it ceremonial. Ambassador, the Zarak pushed forward to the communication panel, his golden eyes blazing with contempt. You invoke judgment against the Dominion? You dare to threaten us with your pathetic little fleet? He laughed, and it was an ugly sound that echoed through the chamber. You are children playing at war, he snarled. The Valith have crushed empires older and stronger than your entire species. We burned your colony because we could, because you are vermin infesting sacred ground, and vermin deserve nothing but extermination. The silence that followed was absolute. Admiral Vance looked at the Zarak through the screen, and something shifted in her eyes, something old and terrible and patient. You call us vermin, she said softly. You burned 2 million people and called them vermin. You murdered children in their schools and families in their homes, and you expected us to come here and negotiate for scraps of justice. She leaned forward. We did not come to negotiate, High Commander. We came to hold you accountable. Accountable? The Zarak laughed again. You cannot hold us accountable for anything. You have no power here, no authority, no strength that could possibly threaten the Dominion. Then you should have been more careful about killing our children. The lower bay of the Themis opened, and something began to descend toward the station, a structure of metal and glass that gleamed under the starlight. It was a courtroom, a fully constructed human courtroom designed to dock with Eternal Discourse. Yelthari watched in disbelief as the structure attached itself to the station's hull, sealing with a hiss of pressure equalization. The humans had not come hoping to negotiate. They had built their courthouse before they even left Earth. What is this? She demanded. What are you doing? Fleet Jag Marcus Cole appeared beside Admiral Vance on the screen, his dark eyes steady and calm. This is the tribunal chamber, Ambassador. The trial of the Valith Dominion will begin in 6 hours. All members of the conclave are invited to observe, and the proceedings will be broadcast across the galaxy. You cannot do this, the Sarek growled. The conclave does not recognize your authority to conduct trials. The Galactic Founding Compact does. Cole interrupted. Article 7 grants any signatory species the right to seek judgment rather than negotiation when they have suffered unprovoked genocide. The Valith Dominion signed that compact 15,000 years ago. He held up a document, letting the camera capture every word. Your ancestors agreed to these terms, High Commander. They accepted that genocide would carry consequences beyond mere negotiation. Perhaps they believed no one would ever invoke this right against them. Cole lowered the document. They were wrong. The Sarek's scales flushed dark with rage. This is an act of war. No, Admiral Vance said quietly. War would be responding to genocide with genocide. War would be burning your worlds the way you burned ours. This is something different. High Commander, this is justice. She gestured to someone off-screen. In 6 hours, you will have the opportunity to defend your actions before the tribunal. You may bring lawyers. You may present evidence. You may argue your case. This is more than you gave the people of New Meridian, who begged for mercy and received only fire. The channel closed. The Zarek stood in the silent chamber, surrounded by his delegation, his golden eyes burning with a hatred that had no words. Around him, the other conclave representatives exchanged nervous glances. This was not how things were supposed to happen. Species came to eternal discourse to negotiate, to compromise, to accept imperfect solutions in exchange for peace. No one had ever come to hold a trial. No one had ever arrived with warships and judges and the cold promise of accountability. Yelthari looked at the human vessels surrounding the station, and for the first time in 600 years, she felt something she barely recognized. It was fear. Not fear of war, not fear of violence, but fear of something far more dangerous. Fear of a species that believed some crimes could not be negotiated away. Some evils could not be discussed into submission. The humans had not come for negotiation. They had come for judgment, and the galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The tribunal chamber was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not decorated with the soft colors and comfortable furniture of the conclave's negotiation rooms. Instead, it was stark and simple walls of gray metal, seats of hard wood, and at the front, 3 chairs raised above everything else where the judges would sit. Behind those chairs hung a single image, the planet New Meridian as it had once been, blue and green and alive with promise. Representatives from every species in the conclave filled the observation galleries, their translators humming quietly as they tried to understand what was happening. They had come expecting entertainment, expecting to watch the young humans embarrass themselves against the mighty Valith Dominion. They were not prepared for what they witnessed instead. Fleet Jag Marcus Cole stood at the prosecutor's podium, his uniform crisp and his voice steady. Across from him sat the Valith delegation, High Commander the Sarek at their center with golden eyes that burned with contempt. The 3 judges entered, and the chamber fell silent. Admiral Helena Vance took the center seat, her face carved from stone. To her right sat Supreme Justice Adara Okonkwo, a woman whose career had been built on the belief that law without enforcement was merely suggestion. To her left sat Dr. Emil Reyes, who had been appointed to represent the colonial authority. Dr. Reyes had a daughter on New Meridian, a daughter who no longer existed. This tribunal is now in session, Admiral Vance announced. The Valith Dominion stands accused of genocide, of crimes against humanity, of the deliberate murder of 2,341,847 civilians who posed no threat and sought only to live in peace. The Sarek rose immediately. his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. "This court has no authority over the Dominion," he declared. "We do not recognize these proceedings. We do not acknowledge these charges. And we certainly do not accept the judgment of a species barely out of its planetary cradle." Cole did not flinch. "The defendant may choose not to participate," he said calmly. "However, Article 7 of the Galactic Founding Compact grants this tribunal full authority to proceed regardless. The Valelith Dominion signed that compact, and by signing, accepted its terms." He turned to the observation galleries. "Let the record show that the accused has chosen to contest the court's authority rather than defend their actions. This is their right, but the trial will proceed." What followed was 3 days of testimony that would haunt the galaxy for generations. Cole presented evidence with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a glacier. He showed sensor logs from human satellites orbiting New Meridian, recordings that captured the moment the Valeth fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. The gallery watched in silence as 17 warships descended on a world that had no military defenses, no weapons platforms, nothing but farms and schools and families going about their daily lives. Cole played communication records between the colonial governor and the Valeth. Commander records that proved the humans had tried everything to prevent the attack. "We offer to relocate," Governor Chen had said, her voice trembling with desperate hope. "Give us time to evacuate, and we will leave this world forever, please. There are children here. There are families who have done nothing wrong." The Valelith commander's response echoed through the chamber. "Your kind negotiates too much. We do not negotiate with vermin." Then the bombardment began. Cole showed footage recovered from security cameras across the colony, footage that captured ordinary moments being shattered by plasma fire. A family eating breakfast when their house exploded. Children playing in a schoolyard when the sky turned to flame. An old man feeding birds in a park when everything around him became ash. 2,341,847 people died in less than 4 hours. But Cole saved the worst for last. "The court will now hear the final transmission from New Meridian," he announced, and his voice carried a weight that made even the Sirac's contemptuous expression flicker. The screen changed to show a shelter beneath the colonial capital, a small room filled with frightened faces. At the center knelt a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, surrounded by 42 children who clung to her as the world burned above them. Her name was Yuna Ase, and she had been a schoolteacher. "Shh, little ones," she whispered, pulling the children closer as the shelter shook with each impact. "I know you are scared. I am scared too, but we are going to be brave together. Yes?" A small boy looked up at her with tears streaming down his face. "Miss Yuna, are we going to die?" Yuna Ase smiled, and it was the bravest thing the galaxy had ever seen. "I do not know, sweetheart," she said softly. "But no matter what happens, I want you to remember that you are loved. You are also loved, and nothing can ever take that away." The shelter shook again, harder this time, and dust rained from the ceiling. "Let us sing," Yuna said, gathering the children even closer. "Do you remember the song about the stars? Let us sing it together." 42 small voices joined hers, trembling and terrified, but somehow still beautiful. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you The transmission ended in static and silence. No one in the chamber moved. Ambassador Yelthari, who had watched negotiations end in shouting matches and near violence, found herself unable to look away from the frozen image of Yuna Ose's face. Beside her, a delegate from the Kethrani collective, a species known for showing no emotion, wept openly for the first time in recorded history. Cole looked at the Sarek. "You called them vermin," he said quietly. "You refused to negotiate with them, refused to give them even the chance to flee. Now you stand before this tribunal and demand that we negotiate with you?" He pointed to the frozen image of the children. "Go ahead, High Commander, negotiate with them. Explain to those 42 children why they deserve to die. Tell Miss Yuna Aze why her song had to end mid-note. Cole's voice hardened. We will wait. The Sarek scales had gone pale. For the first time since the trial began, something other than contempt flickered in his golden eyes, something that might have been uncertainty, might have been fear. He turned and stormed out of the chamber, his delegation following close behind. The doors slammed shut, and Justice Okonkwo spoke into the ringing silence. Let the record show that the defendants have chosen to flee rather than answer for their actions. This tribunal will proceed in their absence. She looked at the observation galleries, at the hundreds of alien faces staring back with expressions the translators could not quite capture. Humanity does not require the presence of the guilty to deliver justice. We require only the truth, and the truth has been shown here today. Dr. Reyes spoke, and his voice cracked with grief he could barely contain. The trial will continue tomorrow. We will hear from survivors, from family members who lost everything, from the military officers who arrived too late to save anyone, but soon enough to see what remained. He looked at the image of Yuna Ace and her children. The galaxy will know what was done to New Meridian. The galaxy will remember every face, every name, every life that was stolen. Admiral Vance closed the session with words that would echo across 1,000 worlds. Some species believe that time heals all wounds, that eventually every crime fades into history. They are wrong. Her eyes found the empty seats where the Velith had sat. Humanity remembers, and humanity judges. 3 days passed, and the galaxy watched. The trial of the Velith Dominion became the most viewed broadcast in galactic history, transmitted to every world with the technology to receive it. Billions of beings across, thousands of species sat before their screens and witnessed something that had not happened in 12,000 years. They watched survivors tell their stories, colonists who had been off-world when the attack came, who returned to find everything they loved turned to glass. They watched families weep for children who would never grow up, for parents who would never grow old, for dreams that had burned along with everything else. They watched military officers describe what they found when rescue ships finally arrived, a world of ash and silence, where the only movement was the wind stirring through ruins that had once been homes. And through it all, the Velith delegation remained absent. High Commander Desirek had retreated to his flagship, surrounded by 40 warships that formed a defensive perimeter around Eternal Discourse Station. He broadcast messages calling the trial a farce, calling the humans cowards and weaklings, promising terrible vengeance against anyone who supported this judicial theater. The Conclave representatives listened to his threats with growing unease. They had seen what the Velith could do, and many of them wondered if the humans had made a terrible mistake. On the 4th day, the tribunal reconvened to deliver its verdict. The chamber was filled to capacity, with hundreds more watching on screens throughout the station. Admiral Vance sat at the center of the judge's bench, her face revealing nothing. This tribunal has reviewed all evidence presented over the past 3 days, she announced. We have heard testimony from survivors and witnesses. We have examined sensor logs and communication records. We have seen the faces of the dead and heard the voices of those who mourn them. She paused, and the silence was absolute. The Velith Dominion is found guilty of unprovoked aggression against a sovereign human world. A murmur ran through the gallery. The Velith Dominion is found guilty of genocide, the deliberate and systematic extermination of a civilian population. The murmur grew louder. The Velith Dominion is found guilty of crimes against sapient life under the laws established by the Galactic Founding Compact. Justice Okonkwo spoke next, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 years of human legal tradition. The sentence is as follows. High Commander, the Sarek and all officers who gave the bombardment order will surrender themselves to human custody immediately. The Valith Military High Command will be dissolved. Reparations equal to the full economic output of the Valith homeworld for 100 years will be paid to the families of the fallen. Dr. Reyes added the final condition, and his voice was cold as the void between stars. The Valith Dominion will construct and maintain a memorial on the site of New Meridian, bearing the name of every person who died, and they will tend that memorial for as long as their species exists. The Sark's response came within seconds. BROADCAST across every channel. His scaled face filled the screens, twisted with rage and contempt. Behind him, his officers laughed openly. Your verdict means nothing, he snarled. You have no power to enforce these ridiculous demands. Your pathetic little fleet cannot threaten the Dominion. He leaned forward, and his golden eyes blazed. I will tell you what will happen now. We will destroy your precious tribunal. We will burn your fleet to atoms, and then we will return to your homeworld and finish what we started on New Meridian. His voice rose to a roar. The Valith do not answer to children playing at justice. We answer to no one. Admiral Vance waited until his tirade ended, then spoke with a calm that made the Sark's rage seem almost childish. You see 47 ships surrounding this station, High Commander. Did you never wonder if there were ships you could not see? The Sarak's expression flickered. What are you talking about? Vance nodded to someone off-screen, and alarms began screaming across Valith space. 7 human vessels appeared as if from nowhere, stealth carriers that had slipped past every sensor, every patrol, every defensive line the Dominion possessed. They had traveled in silence while the trial proceeded, taking positions that would haunt Valith nightmares for generations. 2 carriers orbited the Valith homeworld, their weapons pointed at military installations across 3 continents. 2 more hung above the Dominion's primary shipyards, where half the Valith fleet was being constructed or repaired. 3 positioned themselves over the military academies, where the next generation of Valith officers trained. The Sark's scales went white. This is impossible, he whispered. No one passes through Dominion space undetected, no one. We did not ask for permission, Vance replied. We did not negotiate for access. We simply did what needed to be done. She stood, and her shadow stretched across the chamber like the wing of some vast bird. We knew you would refuse the verdict, High Commander. We knew you would threaten and posture and promise vengeance. This is what empires do when they are accused of crimes. They know they committed. Her voice hardened. So we planned for your refusal before we ever left Earth. The trial was not a bluff. It was not theater. It was not a desperate gamble hoping you would somehow develop a conscience. She pointed directly at the screen. The trial was real. The evidence was real. The verdict is real. And now the sentence is real. The Sarak's second-in-command, a younger Valith named Korath, stepped forward with fear plain in his eyes. High Commander, they have targeting locks on every military facility on the homeworld. If they fire, we lose everything. They would not dare, the Sarak growled, but his voice had lost its certainty. Would we not? Vance asked. You burned 2 million of our people and laughed about it. You called them vermin and refused them even the dignity of negotiation. And now you believe we would not dare to hold you accountable. She shook her head slowly. You made a terrible mistake, High Commander. You assumed that because we are young, we are weak. You assumed that because we prefer peace, we are cowards. You assumed that because we came to this station with judges instead of soldiers, we had forgotten how to fight. Her eyes found his across the vast distance between them. We remember how to fight. We simply prefer to fight for justice rather than conquest. But make no mistake, we will fight. Korath grabbed the Sarak's arm. Sir, please the homeworld. The Sarak shook him off, but his golden eyes had changed. The contempt was still there, but beneath it lurked something new, something he had never felt before. Fear, not fear of death, The Valeth did not fear death. They feared defeat, they feared humiliation, they feared being brought low by a species they had dismissed as irrelevant. And that was exactly what was happening. "You were supposed to negotiate," Korath whispered, and his voice carried across the channel to every listener in the galaxy. "Every species negotiates, that is how the galaxy works." Vance's response would be remembered for 1,000 years. "We are human. We do not forget, and we do not forgive the unforgivable." She sat back down, her hands folded calmly before her. "You have 1 hour to begin surrender procedures. For every hour you delay, we will destroy 1 military installation, starting with your academy on the northern continent, where I understand your own son is currently training." The Sarak's roar of rage echoed through the station. But rage could not stop what was coming. Justice could not be intimidated. And humanity had only just begun. High Commander the Sarak made his choice. Instead of surrender, he ordered his fleet to attack the human carriers orbiting the Valith homeworld. 40 warships broke formation and raced toward their planet, weapons charging, commanders screaming orders that mixed fury with desperation. It was exactly what Admiral Vance had expected. "All carriers, execute Protocol Meridian," she ordered calmly. "Military targets only, no civilian casualties." What followed was unlike any battle the galaxy had ever witnessed. The human carriers did not fire on cities or population centers. They did not burn civilian infrastructure or target non-combatants. Instead, they unleashed precision strikes that the Valeth could barely comprehend. Every military installation on the homeworld was hit simultaneously. Bases exploded, weapons factories crumbled, defensive platforms shattered. But the hospitals next door remained untouched. The schools across the street stood unharmed. The homes surrounding the bases continued to shelter families who watched in terror and amazement. The shipyards were next hundreds of warships under construction or repair, representing decades of military investment, vanished in carefully controlled explosions that left the civilian stations nearby completely intact. The academies fell last, but not to destruction. Instead, human Marines descended in drop pods, securing the facilities and evacuating the students before demolition charges reduced the buildings to rubble. The Sarak's son was among those evacuated, carried to safety by the very humans his father had dismissed as vermin. The Valith fleet arrived too late to stop any of it. By the time the Sarak's warships reached their homeworld, the damage was done. The Dominion's military might had been reduced by 60% in less than 3 hours, and not a single civilian had died. "How?" Korath whispered, staring at the reports flooding his screen. "How did they do this without killing anyone?" The answer was simple, though the Valith would spend generations trying to understand it. Humanity had not come to destroy, humanity had come to judge. Destroying civilians would have made them no better than the Valith. It would have turned justice into vengeance, righteousness into hypocrisy. Instead, they had proven that they could have done far worse and chose not to. They had proven that they were better. The Zarek's flagship was intercepted before it could reach the homeworld. 3 human cruisers surrounded it, their weapons locked on its engines. "High Commander the Zarek," Admiral Vance's voice echoed through his bridge. "Your fleet has been neutralized, your military infrastructure has been destroyed, and your homeworld is under human protection until the terms of the verdict are fulfilled." She paused. "You may continue fighting and watch everything you built crumble, or you may surrender and face judgment for your crimes. The choice is yours, but the outcome is not." The Sarek stood on his bridge, surrounded by officers who no longer met his eyes. He had promised them glory and vengeance, and instead, he had led them to the most humiliating defeat in Valith history. He could fight to the death, that was the Valith way. He could order his ship to ram the human vessels and die with honor. But honor meant nothing if his entire species suffered for his pride. What guarantees do I have?" he asked, and his voice was hollow. "None," Vance replied. "You gave no guarantees to the people of New Meridian. But we are not you. Surrender, and you will face trial. Refuse, and we will take you anyway, along with everyone who follows your orders." The Sarek closed his golden eyes. When he opened them again, something had broken inside him. Not his body, not even his pride, but something deeper. The certainty that had driven him his entire life, the belief that strength was all that mattered, that the powerful made the rules and the weak simply obeyed. "I surrender," he said, and the words tasted like ash. 3 days later, the Sarek stood in chains before the tribunal chamber on Eternal Discourse Station. The observation galleries were filled beyond capacity, with thousands more watching on screens throughout the galaxy. They had come to see something unprecedented, a warlord who had burned worlds brought to justice, not through war, but through law. Admiral Vance looked down at him from the judge's bench. "High Commander the Sarek, you have been found guilty of genocide and crimes against sapient life. Do you have anything to say before this tribunal pronounces final sentence?" The Sarek raised his head, and for a moment, the old fire flickered in his golden eyes. "You think this makes you righteous?" he snarled. "You think holding trials and delivering verdicts makes you better than us? You are conquerors wearing the mask of justice, nothing more." Vance shook her head slowly. "No, Commander. Conquerors take what they want. We came only for what we were owed." She held up a small device, and an image appeared in the air. Yuna Osei's face, surrounded by her students, frozen in that final moment before the transmission ended. "You owed them a future. You took it. So we took yours." The Sarek flinched as if she had struck him. "You will be transported to a human prison world," Justice Okonkwo announced. "You will spend your remaining centuries in a cell overlooking a memorial garden containing one flower for every soul lost on New Meridian." She leaned forward. 2,341,847 flowers, Commander. You will see them every day, and you will remember what you did." The guards led the Sarek away, and he did not resist. Ambassador Yelthari rose from the observation gallery, her 4 eyes reflecting emotions that her translators could not name. "You have shattered 10,000 years of precedent," she said to Admiral Vance. "The Conclave exists to prevent war through negotiation. What you have done here changes everything." Dr. Reyes answered before Vance could speak. "For 10,000 years, empires have hidden behind your negotiation tables while their victims turned to dust. You called it peace, but it was surrender dressed in pretty words." He stood, and grief still lined his face, but something else was there now, something that might have been hope. "We did not break your system, Ambassador. We revealed that it was already broken. Negotiation requires good faith from all parties. Genocide is not a good faith act." Vance nodded in agreement. "Humanity will always negotiate with those who come in good faith. We prefer peace to war, cooperation to conflict, but when you murder millions and then demand we discuss terms over tea and pleasantries." She shook her head. "We do not negotiate with the guilty. We try them." Months passed, and the galaxy slowly adjusted to a universe where justice was possible. 17 species came forward with stories of their own, atrocities committed against them that the Conclave had settled with meaningless compromises and empty words. They demanded the same right that humanity had claimed, the right to seek judgment instead of negotiation. The Conclave voted, and a new statute was added to the Galactic Founding Compact. It was called the New Meridian Doctrine, and it read, "When negotiation would mock the dead, judgment shall speak instead." A young Conclave historian asked an elder what had changed. The elder looked toward the empty seats where the human delegation had sat before returning home to mourn and rebuild. "We spent 40,000 years believing that civilization meant avoiding conflict at any cost. the elder said slowly. We thought that compromise was always better than confrontation, that peace purchased with injustice was still peace. She paused. The humans taught us something different. Sometimes justice is the price of true peace, and some species are willing to pay it on a world that would one day be called New Meridian 2. Construction crews worked through the night to build the first memorial. At its center stood a statue of Yuna Asay, her arms wrapped around her students, her face lifted toward the stars she had traveled so far to reach. The sculptor had captured her exactly as she appeared in that final transmission, brave beyond measure, loving beyond reason. The inscription at the base was simple. They expected us to negotiate. We chose to remember instead. For the 2,341,847, humanity does not forget, and across the galaxy, species that had once dismissed humans as children learned a truth that would shape the next 10,000 years of history. Humanity remembered every wound, mourned every loss, and honored every promise. And when pushed too far, humanity did not negotiate. Humanity judged.